Welcome everyone to Awesome Truth, a wrestling book club. I'm your host, Steve Semino, and with me as always is my co-host, Walt Schwenk. Hey, Walters.
Hello, Steven. How's it going?
My friend, it is going very well. We are back on Awesome Truth, and today we are talking about a feature film. Actual feature wall, like a movie that didn't come out in theaters, which is, a way to describe feature film. It is content that was released on the internet, but it's a real movie. And I think, we'll get into why I would give it that sort of classification. It's streamable right now on Amazon Prime, and it's called Cassandro, and it's about Lucha Libre wrestling. It's about exoticos. It stars Gael Garcia Bernal, a very, renowned actor in his own right. And it's a movie about, the changing mores of Lucha Libre wrestling, a character study, sort of what life is like if, to be a certain type of character down there, how they sort of operate. It jumped out to us, Walt, as just, hey, they made a movie about wrestling. We should watch this. And, it's certainly is about a little bit more than wrestling, but we will try and focus on the wrestling elements for the most part, I think, in dissecting this movie.
This isn't a feature film. It's a premium streaming film experience.
Sure. That's right. That's a good way. It's a lot of words, but it is a good way to sum it up, right?
I mean, it's hard to classify, Red Notice as like a feature film when it's like a piece of shit on Netflix.
Yeah, it's like,
but it's a movie. It's a movie by definition, but it's not. It's like, yeah, I mean,
it's this is the, like you said, it is hard to determine, it's 10 hours of 10 1-hour episodes of one thing and 1 2-hour episode of another thing. Like, they flattened the whole market for what these things are. This is a movie, I would say, because this is like a well shot movie. I would say it's directed by a guy named Roger Ross Williams. This is his first feature. He's done a lot of documentaries. He's won Academy Awards. This is his first full length feature. And I think it just looks really good. The first thing that jumped out at me as I was watching it, especially in the first half hour, I was like, this looks like a movie that was made with a lot of care and thought and was just bought by Amazon Prime. I got the vibe that like they really cared about how they were putting this out. It was screened at Sundance and it was released. I'm not 100% sure where the money came from exactly, whether it was just bought or whether it was made with that in mind. But I just got the sense that they actually, this was made in the tradition of how you make a movie, which is you put care into how it's lit, how it's shot, that sort of thing.
Yeah, not to discredit it by making light of like streaming services putting out like actual like feature like movies, because this was a film. This was a well, like to your point, a well shot film, and it was about it was about a thing. So that checks another box, I think.
It's about, should we talk about what so the plot is pretty straightforward, I would say. It's about, if you're not familiar with Lucha Libre, and neither one of us are certainly experts, but we've, consumed, well, you've been to matches in Mexico City, correct?
I did stock Ticketmaster in Mexico for CMLL Anniversario show number 89, so the 89th anniversary.
There you go. So you have some hands-on savvy on the topic then, right?
I mean, I saw Sin Cara there, and it was a lot of fun and a lot of tears.
And I saw, my experience is I watched a lot of Lucha Underground, and Lucha Underground paid homage to the history of a lot of Lucha Libre wrestling and how certain characters are portrayed, and I learned a little bit from stuff like that. So again, far from experts, and I think one of the reasons we're intrigued by this is, let's see what this, a glimpse into another world, a part of wrestling that we don't watch a lot about, read a lot about. Like, wrestling is just a rich history in Mexico, and I thought it was going to be fun to learn, and I guess there is some information here. Like, it's certainly it is illuminating in some ways on specifically what it might be like to be an exotico, which is, if you don't know, it's a type of wrestler that is basically very effeminate. You're a male who prances around the ring and is very displays a lot of gay tendencies outwardly and externally, and is typically like sort of silly and loses a lot and gets booed, especially by like hyper masculine crowds. And so but it's a very entertaining, in quotes, sort of character that has existed for a very long time. Certainly, I believe this movie is set in the 80s, and it is very much, and like and those days, I imagine the booing and the jeering of the exoticos was even more explicit.
This movie is set in the 80s.
I'm learning this from Wikipedia right now. And the thing about, as I said that out loud, I was like, I guess that's true because there's no cell phones. Like, it's not explicitly set now, but I do think that's not, readily transparent, right? It doesn't scream 80s, but they are sort of wearing, and thinking back, they are sort of wearing 80s jeans, and it has a little bit of an 80s look to it.
Well, I guess like the talk show felt very 80s at the
Yes.
end, but like I didn't even put that together, and I think,
No one really, like, Bad Bunny looks like Bad Bunny. Bad Bunny's in this movie, and he's not styled as an 80s person in any ways. Right. He changed nothing about himself. He just showed up one day and was Bad Bunny.
Bullet Train star Bad Bunny was also featured in this, which I'm sure we could talk about if we want to. But I think that actually illustrates more of a concern that I had with this film. This took place in the 80s, like, because there's a lot of things that I feel like we kind of just like took for granted with this story, and well, I don't know how much more I want to talk about this right now, because this just dives into like a big issue I had with the film. Is like, I guess Cassandro won over the crowd because I thought this was 2023, and it's like we're in a new age, and like that's why suddenly his exotico portrayal like became a fan favorite. But now that you're telling me it takes place in the 80s, it makes even less sense now to me.
Do you know that Cassandra, that's a real person?
Oh, is it?
This is a real story too, which I honestly did not know until very recently as well. That is also not incredibly clear either, but that adds a little more. So let's get into some things. So this movie, again, I think one of the things I really like about this movie is I think it shows you a side of, of wrestling. One thing we complain about in the show in particular is so much wrestling, filmed entertainment, but everything about wrestling feels the need to explain the concepts of wrestling to people so laboriously and so just spelled out. And it just gets so annoying, especially from our perspective as wrestling podcasters covering books and movies and TV shows. We know this by the back of our hands, but so much of the audience already knows this too in 2023. It just seems silly to have to do this every time you tell a wrestling story. You don't need to explain the concept of wrestling. One thing I like about this movie is it doesn't do that at all. It's a lot of show not tell, especially in the beginning. Like, it shows you the backstage of Lucha Libre matches. It shows you the main character, Gael Garcia Bernal, plays a character named Saul, who eventually becomes Cassandro. It shows how he goes through life, how, as a masked jobber, basically, just gets eaten up and spit out by a big guy who everybody likes. Like, I think it does a great job of portraying those elements without, having to overly explain what is going on in front of your eyes. It just lets you pick it up as it goes. And I think that in the first half hour or so, I was very on board. I was like, great, this is what we want from a wrestling story. Just like, we're going to understand the concepts very clearly if you just show them in relative detail and then move on.
Could you imagine like any sort of biopic about like basketball or music, where it's like basketball was a sport invented in Carolina in 18.
Dr. James Naismith threw a ball in a basket. It would be insane. It would be so stupid.
If I watched like the HBO series and they gave me those explanations every 5 seconds, I'd be so pissed as a basketball fan. So like the same rules apply for wrestling. Like, give people a little bit of credit, but yeah, we talk about this a lot. There's always that balance of like how much is too much exposition and context for what, you might watch this movie and not be a wrestling fan. Like, that'd be weird, but it might happen. And in which case then like you might need that hand holding, but like you might not, because I think everybody fundamentally kind of understands wrestling. So I agree with you. I think the first 30 minutes, it's like, great. We're just like cutting out the bullshit, just cutting right to the chase. Like, great.
And he goes to get trained by his trainer, Sabrina, who is Roberta Colindrez, plays her. And she's a great character, like a very, esteemed wrestler who understands how to do things, a trainer. And he sort of gets better as he goes. And it's just, it's all very understandable stuff. Like working your way up, becoming actually, like he's basically an enthusiast who is, a hobbyist of a wrestler who starts throwing himself into wrestling and then in turn throws himself into a character, which is Cassandra, which is an exotico, as we said. And so then the crux of the movie becomes can Cassandro be this Exotico character, which usually is sort of booed and mocked and silly? Is there a way to make that character a little more realistic, a little more grounded, and really a fan favorite? Tough, a lot of these adjectives that you wouldn't typically, ascribe to an Exotico, which, as you know, Walt, if this was a 2023 set movie, that would just make a lot of sense, because you're okay, like, the treatment of gay characters across wrestling has been improved. Humanity as a whole, I like to think, the majority, maybe not everybody, but a lot of people are more accepting of different types of people. So it seems like this would be a very good time to say, okay, gay characters don't just have to be, fun A or B mocked. They can be tough wrestlers. They can be out there competing for titles and legitimate and fan favorites and all these things. To hear that it's the 80s, I'm glad that that happened for the real Cassandro. Like, that does seem like a big leap, especially in Mexico, but it does feel weird, and it makes me understand a little more why this movie gets so disjointed. Like, at a certain point it becomes less about the Saul's journey to become a legitimate wrestler, a respected Exotico, and instead the movie starts jumping very quickly from thing to thing. Like, it lays less groundwork, and it becomes just like a series of basically vignettes, quick little snippets that don't really make sense, in my opinion, that don't really work in the context of the movie, or it doesn't really explain why they're happening. Like, it just moves at a fast speed, and I guess now I know it's because that's what happened in real life to a certain extent, but I thought it got very disjointed at a certain point, and we lost the thread of, like, this is a wrestler finding himself amidst his own personal turmoil, his internal struggle, his external struggle. That was all there, and eventually that sort of became window dressing, I feel like, for a movie that just sped along.
I mean, excuse me, that's where the balance kind of tips in the opposite scale in this instance, because it's like, yeah, you're not telling me what wrestling is for the 5 millionth time. Great. But I left myself asking why a lot. Like, wait, why is this female wrestler like investing in this guy? He just like showed her a back bump and suddenly she's like super.
Hey, yeah,
I'm gonna train you for free now. Like, wait, what? Why? Like, that seems like the opposite of what any wrestling trainer would say or do. Why did the fans start cheering for Cassandro exactly? Like, what did he bring different to the presentation of an Exotico? Like they kind of like show you like, oh, Exoticos were this thing that like from a bygone era, I think, or maybe they weren't. Maybe they still exist in the 80s. And so this was less of like a callback or like a nostalgia act, and more of like just like one of the like just this one just decided to break through. Like, I'm not really left with a whole lot of like explanation for a lot of what was happening. I'm just like, just accept the fact that people liked it. I'm like, well, I kind of need to know why this act broke through, because to me, it was the same. Like, it wasn't really that different from anything else that they presented before. So I just don't understand why suddenly Cassandro is popular, I guess. And then like these like seedy promoters come up to him later, like, oh, you're great. It's like, why did they think he was great? Why did anybody think this was great? I mean, it's objectively, it was a fun act and a fun thing for this guy to do other than be a jobber. But like, I just don't know why people thought he was great.
Yes, and I think that's 100% true. Like, I appreciate what the movie's trying to accomplish, which is that Saul is a gay man himself. And so, it taps into a thing that wrestling, wrestlers and promoters, everyone talks about all the time, which is turn yourself up to 11. And that's your character. And that's the way you're going to be successful in wrestling. And that is what Saul seems to do as Cassandro, is, embrace that he's gay and accept that, and sort of accept that he's going to be hated by a lot of people, but use it to fuel his character, to fuel his wrestling, and become better at his craft. And so as a story element, I think that's great. I think there's plenty there. It's not tried and true, but we've said before in the show, tried and true is fine in wrestling and movies and TV. Like, if you stick the landing and hit all your beats along the way, that's totally fine. Where the movie could use more wrestling explanation is, like you said, like, what makes Cassandra so special? Like, maybe there is a need for exposition somewhere about what is up with Exoticos, why they're treated this way, what he does does that is so explicitly different or special or unique, because it's just really not there. Like there's some conversation in the movie along the lines of, I want Mike Exotico to be tough and to win and to, you know, be treated more seriously. But to be honest, in the footage they show of matches, doesn't seem like he's that good. You know, like, doesn't seem like he's that special, that unique, that good. It seems like a very similar character to what I've led to believe other Exoticos are. And so the idea that Cassandro was so special historically and in the movie is just really not there. Like, I don't understand it. And like you said, I don't understand why the whole world of Mexican wrestling sort of twists and bends to embrace him and accept him and promote him. Like, I understand the concept that wrestling promoters will back almost anything if it's making them money, but I don't really get why audiences liked him so much. It feels very unearned.
Yeah.
That at that point the movie is just telling you he's special, he's unique, and because it's Gael Garcia Bernal, I'm like, okay, I sort of feel a little charisma from this actor and, you know, the performance, but I don't see it in the wrestler at all.
Well, because like later in the movie when he's starting to like gain steam, it's like, oh shit, the crowd loves this guy. Like, I'll give you $1,000 to like lose to him right now, and just switching, like pivoting, like, you know, that's what a good wrestling promoter would do, is like, oh, he sees the crowd gravitate towards one wrestler, so I'm gonna push him. But like that first scene where he debuts Cassandro, he's really timid. He's not very flamboyant or flashy. So he wasn't even a good Exotico in that first match. And then, but for some reason, like the crowd like starts liking him, but like, based on what he described to us as like previous attempts at Exotico, there was no reason for me to think that people would just suddenly change them, which is why I'm like, wait, this wasn't like shot yesterday, like, or like this story doesn't take place like yesterday, because that, while lazy too, in a sense that like, oh, I guess I would assume that everybody in 2020 and after is just gonna like support a gay wrestler, like, which is like completely understandable with where we are in the world today. But like, that was what my assumption this entire time was, because so like, I think what I'm trying to say is I needed someone to hold me by the hand and be like, oh, see, he did this like really cool thing, and now suddenly like the crowd loves him. Like, oh, okay, because I didn't see it. And
yeah.
I'm a wrestling fan, so I don't know.
And
what are we doing here, guys?
And I think that, you know, where the movie ultimately ends up, and we don't need to harp too much on this, because I think what the movie's going for is fine and genuine, and, you know, and the message is, you know, in a vacuum, is one that I can respect and appreciate. But at the end, you know, it becomes pretty clear. There's a talk show scene with El Hijo del Santo, who is, you know, the son of El Santo, who is one of the most famous Mexican wrestlers, ever, if not the most famous Mexican wrestler. And El Hijo del Santo hosts a talk show. Which, first off, I think that's amazing. That wrestling, it'd be like, because I know Stone Cold Steve Austin hosts a podcast, but this was like El Hijo del Santo doing like the Johnny Carson show. You know, like I don't think it was a wrestling show in particular. I think he was just I think at a certain point you've become an entertainer, you know, and it's very good to me to imagine one American wrestler just hosting like a legitimate, like, has to sit there for an hour and make small talk and like do like monologues and all that stuff.
Yeah, right. Tell jokes. Okay.
Yeah, that looks great. But he has Cassandro on, and like it becomes El Hijo del Santo saying like, Cassandro, what a great opponent you've been. And then there's a kid in the crowd who says, Cassandro, like, you're a role model, and everyone goes, aw, and claps, and that's sort of it, you know. That's the end. Cassandro is famous, everyone loves him, the fans, you know, gay fans relate to him, children are inspired by him, and that's sort of the end of the story. And I just think there's just, again, while that in theory is very nice and lovely, it's just this movie moves so quickly. You're like, wait, I don't understand. Like, to me, honestly, the whole last half hour of the movie felt like a fever dream. Like, there's a scene in the movie where Cassandro is fighting El Hijo del Santo in Mexico City, and it's not going well, and he's sort of regressing in his portrayal of the character, and everyone's booing and being mean. And so Cassandro runs off into the crowd, goes to the second level of the stadium somehow incredibly fast, and jumps off into the crowd, and crowd surfs back to the ring. And everyone goes, ah! Everyone loses their mind and thinks it's the best thing ever for whatever reason. And all of a sudden, that's great. The rest of the match goes great. And I believe that the implication is off to the races, one of the most famous wrestlers of all time after that. First off, that scene it's weird. I mean, maybe that happened, maybe it didn't. It comes across as insane and fake And it honestly feels like a scene where Cassandro jumps off the second level and in the dies, you know, like. But what we see is in his final fleeting moments this magical dream where he becomes famous and successful and beloved and everything goes his way, because the rest of it is just feels so false, you know, and feels so phony, for lack of a better term. Like, it just doesn't feel earned anymore. It feels like his dreams all come true, which again, I'm happy if that happened in real life, but it just does not feel earned in the case of the movie. It just feels like it comes out of nowhere. And I'm just struck by all that at the end. That like this movie that seems so, you know, smooth and coherent and straightforward in the beginning, and using the power of cinema to tell a story, becomes so rote and conventional and paint by numbers at the end.
You know, the more we talk about this, the more you kind of explain like how you viewed this, the more I start to think like this maybe should have just been a documentary. Because the presentation of information at this point with this movie is kind of just like, this thing happened, and this thing happened, and then this thing happened, and then this thing happened, with some light reflection in between for like character moments. But like, you know, I think from a cultural relevance perspective, it's like things are just happening, and it's just like kind of like disjointed from one thing to the next. And then suddenly, Star is born. Not like the movie, but like, so not that we need more wrestling documentaries. I'm certainly not advocating for that, but yeah, I mean, a lot of it did kind of just seem, I don't want to say random, just like things didn't seem very connected at times.
Yeah, it's just, if we had known this was a real story from the start, if we had known it was set in the 80s, if we had known that Cassandro was a real person, if we had known that he became this famous beloved luchador, it would have just we would have taken the whole rest of the movie much differently. And I think we would have just appreciated learning more about Exoticos and Lucha Libre and how they were presented in the 80s. Like, it just would have made so much more sense. I think the sort of way they present it as this, you know, like you said, this story sort of set out of time in some ways, and this character that, you know, certainly a story relevant now, but even more relevant if we had known that it was set 30 years ago, like 40 years ago. This it would have been, I would have accepted it totally differently and thought of it totally differently, and not been surprised and confused and curious by the ways it was going. So I think your point is very well found. I will also say one thing about this movie that struck me is, you know, they did a thing, you know, again, the message is, if, you know, as a gay man, he learned to embrace his character, and that in turn allowed him, I think, to accept and unlock certain things within himself that he maybe had trouble with before and struggled with. Certainly his family issues come up, and that's all. I think those are all, you know, straightforward, but still, you know, well done parts of the movie. But it reminded me so much of Heels. You know, we've talked about the very different thing. This is obviously a real person and going through real struggles. Heels is a dumb fictional stars show. But what Heels doesn't do is, where Heels seemed like it was going, as we talked on the show, was Ace, one of the main characters on Heels, sort of the bad boy, the cool guy. He is an asshole in real life, and where Heels seems like it's going is, you know, as a wrestler, you can embrace, whether they are, you know, whether you're a gay man, whether you're a piece of shit, you can sort of, you can be yourself, and you can perform for people and be entertaining and make a career out of it, and hopefully maybe go through a sort of catharsis or therapy, for lack of a better term, where you can accept that this might be who you are. And again, not to say that being a jerk and being gay are the same thing at all, but it just seemed like there was something in, at least when Heels was trying to tell that story, it seemed like that is just a part of wrestling that does go underexplored. You know, like, it is a way for a lot of people who are weird and unique and you know, have their own idiosyncrasies and oddnesses about them. Like, wrestling does attract a lot of oddballs, and it attracts people who are, you know, trying to find themselves and who are off the beaten path. And, you know, it just seemed like that was something that this movie was going to embrace to a certain extent, and it did. And, you know, it does that. Those are the parts that I really did enjoy. Is like, it is obviously way more comforting to be yourself than to not be. And the scenes where our soul does embrace himself as a person, and uses that to fuel a wrestling character. I did like that. I think there is a movie there, and there are story beats there that work really well and are inspiring and are interesting. I don't get why that had to be so, like, divorced from some of the elements of wrestling. I don't know. I don't get why. I feel like that is a sort of a separate movie from the wrestling. I feel like you're trying to tell a story of acceptance and understanding and embracing oneself, and then you're also touching on, obviously, that man is an exotico and he wrestles in Lucha Libre, but I don't think it really goes through it. Actually, I think the setting and the characters and all the other elements of wrestling that it did so well with in the beginning, it sort of loses the thread at that point, and it becomes less about the wrestling itself, more about this person who was was a better person and was an inspiration to many, and then he also does some wrestling shit, and and we're sort of gonna awkwardly present that, and it's not really gonna matter at the end.
Right, because there's definitely a lot of implicit. I don't even know if it's implicit, actually. Like, there's just like, I think there's more to explore with just the context of what the hell what's going on, because like, when you are in WWE and you are in, let's say it's the year 2000, and you're just like another jacked up dude with like no personality, and it's like, or worse, you're being told you're going to be a minotaur or some character. Like, it's easy to just like completely get lost in the shuffle and lose yourself. Now imagine being in the 80s or being in like the Lucha Libre scene, and you're kind of undersized, and you're just wearing a mask, just like everybody else. It's like, I could imagine it being very, like, talk about just like becoming one of many. Like, it's so easy to kind of just like get sucked into that void of just, another luchador with just a different color, like a different skin, almost like a video game like character. It's just, like,
yep.
It's just like carbon copy, like you're an NPC, like whatever. So in like, there's a lot to be explored there, and contextually with like, God, it's so hard to break through in this scene, because I'm just like, my body's not impressive, and I have my character's no personality. I'm just a guy in a mask, and I'm facing this like lumbering giant every week and just getting destroyed, and there's no reason for me to even have an offense. So like, in that case, it makes a total sense for this guy to like, hey, I'm a gay man. I'm eccentric. I have all these, like, I have all these things that I gravitate towards, like myself, and I'm going to turn that up to 11 and then really accentuate that character, which is a reflection to a certain degree of who I am, using like his mother's dress that like he saw and loved when he was growing up. Like, there's a little scene like that. So like, I think there's a lot more to even touch upon and to explore with this world and this character doing this thing for this reason. And those are the things that I think you do need someone to hold your hand a little bit through, because like, while I don't need someone to explain what wrestling is to me for the 1000th time, I think there is something to be said about like someone kind of explaining, like, it's so easy to get lost in the flood if you're just one of like many.
Yeah. You're not going to be successful in wrestling unless you find a character that stands out. And it doesn't have to be 100% you. But like I said, that certainly does not hurt when you find something that is true to yourself. And so that is, you're right. There is so much narrative juice there. There's so much to say about someone who to stand out. You need to find that person. If it's difficult to look inside yourself and accept yourself and become that person, that just makes it that much harder. And so being able to succeed in both areas at the same time is triumphant. Like there's so much there. And I know that, again, I know that's what this movie's going for, but like I said, paint by numbers, it becomes less about the actual journey and the struggle and all that, and it becomes just like beat by beat, here's how this person became Cassandro or someone famous. And it doesn't feel real. Like, it feels fake. It doesn't feel like a real story, because the movie doesn't earn any of what's happening. Like, it feels like an inspirational tale about a wrestler who did this thing that can then be an example for many others who want to do that. And so to find that this is a real person who really did these things, just like, oh, the movie just did not make that. It doesn't even need to tell me explicitly, but it did not feel like a thing that could actually be done. It just didn't make sense in the context. It was confusing. It was odd. And like I said, it didn't touch on these things that you think would be part of the real life story had it been an actual person who actually went through these struggles that came on the other side. I don't know. That's just, if that was both our experiences, I think that is really a problem. But
just because he existed in real life or not, like, it's a nice footnote, but like, yeah, to your point, if the presentation there's something missing from the presentation. It shouldn't matter if they exist or not. Like I can like it lacked reality regardless that it's a nonfiction story because of, to your point, there was just like I don't say lackadaisical, but there just seemed to be less of a need to connect ideas and thoughts and motivations and just like why is this happening right now? Like I was just left constantly asking, why is this happening right now?
Yep. And it's a shame because I was really excited when the movie started and got going, because I just think there's like Heels is, again, because compare it just as another contemporary wrestling story being told on television and entertainment right now. Heels is a dumb show, a silly show. Like we said in many episodes, it has a Friday Night Lights hook to it where there is some heart and some family elements, but it really is just, it's not made to be introspective or particularly unique. Like it's made to entertain and to sort of mine the wrestling world in a lot of tropes and a lot of sort of generic ideas. When Cassandro started, I was like, this could be a like artfully made film that also shows some elements of wrestling in a way that is not just for mass consumption, like a way that I just think there is a lot of rich narrative within wrestling, and I think and to have Cassandro touch on a lot of that a little bit, like wade into it a decent amount, but ultimately retreat to being so just sort of rah, like, look at this guy, isn't he great? And again, he probably is great, and what he did does sound inspiring, but just to not tell the story like you said, when there is an option of just make a documentary that achieves essentially the same purpose and is more clear and more concise, and then you can be as treacly and as just as enjoyably rah-rah as you want. You don't have to sort of hit these narrative beats. You can just tell someone's nice story and I'm going to say, what a nice documentary. That happens all the time. So to tell it as sort of in a more narrative format is just ultimately brings a story down that I think should have a little more weight to it.
And that being said too, I mean, you touched upon this, but like the scenes in between the wrestling moments and the career highlight packages, I guess, for lack of a better term, we're good. I mean, like it was like a compelling narrative, and just the parallels between like his his mom being the mistress and him being a mistress, like there was a lot to work with there, and the idea of like not, like vying for his father's affection all his life, only to realize that like he never really needed it. Like there's there I don't want to just lose the positives of this because they didn't give me enough of the wrestling.
Sure.
Not that that's what we're doing, but I do have to give it some credit because there were some great cinematic moments and good character moments and things that you would have expected from a narrative like this too.
Yeah, I mean, if you look on the consensus on Rotten Tomatoes, as a feel-good biopic, and I think that's a really easy way to describe it, but a very accurate one. And I just think there's more here than a feel-good biopic. Like when it sort of evolves into that or devolves into that, there's a million of those, like that, and some of them are more inspiring than others, and some of them are about more interesting characters, and some of them are about wrestling, and some of them are about scientists. Like it almost doesn't really, but a lot of them become the same sort of thing. Like they follow a very similar blueprints, they follow a very similar structure, and they have moments that are very impactful and emotionally honest and all that kind of stuff. But that doesn't make them particularly memorable. Like that makes them movies you watch and go, oh, that was pleasant, and you move on. And and Gil Garcia Bernal, like I said, he did a lot of his own stunts. You can tell, like he clearly tried I imagine this character, really spoke to him, and he does a very good job. And like you said, he especially does a good job in the scenes where he has to act, where he has to talk to his mother and talk to his father and deal with the emotional ramifications. But as a movie that is based in the world of wrestling and uses that as the setup and the background for all this, it just feels like a wasted opportunity. I just think there's so much more there that could have been delved into a little more, could have been more richly described, and could have used wrestling even more to emphasize why this is a good world for a person like him, why he fits here, why he sort of may not have fit elsewhere. Like there's a lot there, and it becomes background, and I think it could have became more.
Yeah, I agree. I mean,
and Bad Bunny's there, and he is sort of just there. Doesn't really do a lot.
Yeah, I thought he was going to have more of a role, but I guess not. It's just a guy who speaks Spanish and
works for
is
the
a wrestling
promoter
fan.
and has sexual tension with Saul, and that's it.
Yeah, I was confused about that part. I'm like, is this going to happen or not? And then it didn't. I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Like, I guess there's a lot documented on this. Random promoters like Messenger Boy, like, and like, you know what I mean?
Yep.
Anyway.
Well, Cassandro is on Amazon Prime. Well, I would say, I mean, it has good reviews for the most part, but most of them are very light and pleasant good reviews. You know, most of them are like harmless, you know, inspiring, riveting, touching. Like, it's all these things that you say about a movie when you are pleasantly entertained and then you put it back on the shelf, digital or real, never to really reckon with it again. And I think that there's not a ton to reckon with here, and it's a shame because it does seem like there's a lot. And I know that Roger Ross Williams, the director, made a documentary about Cassandra before, a short film, I believe, but maybe that's worth a watch too. Maybe that actually, it's called The Man Without a Mask, and perhaps that has what we're looking for. But unfortunately, I don't think Cassandra has the juice that we'd love to see from a movie that is, you know, about a topic we don't know a ton about a person we did not know was real. Just feels like there could have been a lot there, and instead it just is fine.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with those assessments. It was what would you call it before? A pleasant biopic?
Yeah, a feel-good biopic, a pleasant little romp, you know?
It's a romp. Well, yeah.
Well, it's true. It's not really a romp. I will say there's one part when Cassandra's coming out and the ring announcer says from the beauty parlor as sort of his place of birth, and I like from the beauty parlor as a great version of Parts Unknown for an Exotico. I think that's pretty good.
And Brutus Beefcake.
Yeah, that's right. Was he from the barbershop? Is that what they said?
It's probably from like Augusta, Georgia, or like Tampa, Florida, or whatever.
Oh, yep. Well, there you go. Cassandro's on Amazon Prime if you want to give it a watch. Gael Garcia Bernal, a fantastic actor. The movie is okay. But if you want to hear more of Awesome Truth talking about movies, we've talked about many features in the past, including No Holds Barred, the Hulk Hogan movie, pretty much the exact opposite of this movie in every way. You can find our archives at awesometruth.libsyn.com. You also subscribe to us and get all new episodes and old ones on all your favorite podcast apps, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts, wherever podcasts are delivered. And you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at awesometruthpod. Well, lovely to talk about a feature film with you, even if it wasn't the best. It's you know, I appreciate that they're trying to tell wrestling stories. You know, it's good for us in the content world because we get more stuff to talk about, and there's more there. And I hope wrestling becomes the backdrop for even more well-told stories. I really think there's a lot you can do with it.
Definitely more on Amazon because they seem to put in the production value.
Yeah, they made a real movie. Like we said, the very least, if you watch Cassandro, you'd be like, this person really cared about how this movie looked, and I think that's good. And there's, you know, the crowd shots in Mexico City. Like, I don't know if they filled an arena, but it's if you watch like a movie like Creed 2 or Creed 3, like recent, you know, boxing movies or movies with big crowds, those crowds, you know, look CGI'd to death. Like, it looks terrible. It looks super fake. And I will say here, maybe it's just the way they shot it. Maybe they just filled the front rows. Who knows? But it does not look like fake at all. Like, you can use movie magic to make an arena seem more full than it's not. And I feel like Cassandro on a budget used like the old timey tricks, you know, from a 70s or an 80s movie where you do certain things right beyond just using a computer, and it just looks more real. It looks more grimy. It looks more legitimate. It looks like you'd be playing like in maybe not a shitty stadium, but like a longer lasting stadium, a stadium of with history and a lot behind it in Mexico City. Like, I feel like those things make this maybe a little more worth watching. So.
Well, you can't just have a green screen catch you when you do a New Jack stadium dive. Or
that's true.
Yeah, it's a little hard.
I didn't even think of New Jack, but you're right. That is a New Jack style.
Yeah. Well, now that I know it's an 80s movie, or it takes place in the 80s, I know that they couldn't have been inspired by New Jack. New Jack's ECW.
New Jack was inspired by Cassandro. I'm sure he'd love to hear that, right?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it works the other way around. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, everyone. Thank you all so much for listening. And remember, the truth will set you free.